Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, so when you think about sustainable energy, the future of it, your mind probably jumps to like huge solar farms in deserts, right? Or maybe offshore wind turbines spinning away. But what if the real breakthroughs, the keys to unlocking a truly green future are actually being forged somewhere totally different, somewhere remote, maybe somewhere well, unexpected. Today, we're taking you on quite a journey way up north in Europe, Lapland, Finland. And we're going to explore some truly remarkable research laid out in this study. Our focus for this deep dive is this analysis titled From Winter Wind to Summer Sun, Unlocking the Arctic Region's Sustainable Energy Potential. And our mission really is to unpack how a region like Lapland, unique resources, pretty challenging environment, how it could actually transform into a pivotal Arctic energy hub. We're talking leveraging its potential not just for electricity, but producing e-fuels, e-chemicals, the stuff we'll need, all while bringing, real economic and environmental benefits, according to this study. So get ready for some surprising facts and maybe some big implications for how we think about energy transitions globally. Let's set the stage first. The broader context here, for Europe at least, is really ambitious. The EU has set these seriously firm climate goals, a 55% cut in greenhouse gases by 2030, and then full climate neutrality by 2050. That's huge. But it's not just emissions, is it? There's this critical need for energy security, cutting dependency on fossil fuel imports, especially from outside Europe. So where do things like e-fuels and e-chemicals fit into hitting those massive targets?
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting, actually. Because, a lot of people assume we could just electrify everything directly. But the reality is that's not possible for all energy demands. You have these hard-to-abate sectors.
Right, things like steel making.
Exactly. Steel making, chemicals production, heavy transport to marine shipping, aviation, they need dense transportable energy. And that's precisely where e-fuels and e-chemicals come in. They are indispensable for those areas. What this study highlights is that indirect electrification, what we often call power to X.
Power to X, converting renewable electricity into fuels and chemicals.
Right. That's projected to account for about 40% of the future fuel and chemical demand in these energy-intensive industries. And just to give you a sense of the scale, Germany alone, they're projected to need something like 95 to 130 terawatt hours of hydrogen or its derivatives by 2030.
Wow.
And get this, 50 to 70% of that is expected to be imported. The EU's own hydrogen strategy, back from 2020, it aims for hydrogen to meet 10% of all energy needs by 2050. So the demand globally for these new green fuels is just immense.
Okay, so immense demand, and then enter Lapland. Honestly, when I picture Lapland, it's usually Santa, reindeer, snow. Not exactly a, cutting-edge industrial energy hub. But this research paints a very different picture. It describes Lapland as Finland's northernmost region, very sparsely populated, mostly inside the Arctic Circle. This analysis really emphasizes its huge open spaces, the abundant renewables, especially wind and hydro, and it already has a low-carbon energy system in place, which makes it uniquely suited for large-scale renewable electricity generation. And crucially, it also points out its access to the sea through the port of Kemi. That enhances connectivity for trade, doesn't it? How does Lapland's specific position, geographically and politically, give it this unique edge in the race?
Well, what's fascinating here is thinking about the EU's strategic choices regarding energy independence. The Union faces this decision. Produce these critical e-fuels and chemicals internally within its borders to really maximize energy security or rely heavily on imports from outside the bloc. Now, sure, you've got Sunbelt regions, North Africa, Australia maybe, or other windy spots like Chile or Greenland. They're all potential global exporters. But this study really underscores Lapland's advantage as an EU member.
Right. The membership itself is key.
Exactly. It means much easier energy trade, enhanced energy security for the huge European market compared to non-EU nations. Plus, it benefits from a milder climate and, importantly, more established existing infrastructure than, say, Greenland. That makes large-scale development more practical. And another interesting point from the analysis, unlike some other potential remote hubs, maybe like Shetland, Lapland wouldn't necessarily require a massive population surge to actually support this new e-fuel industry.
That's a really critical distinction, isn't it? It's not just about having the wind or the space. It's about the whole package, geopolitical realities, logistics that make Lapland look incredibly attractive. So how does the research actually see Lapland's energy system transforming? It seems like we need to picture a pretty radical shift, even from its current mix, which is already quite clean with hydro and wind, plus some biomass and peat, towards a 100% renewable future. How does that look?
The figures laid out in this analysis are quite compelling. Lapland's power generation capacity, projected to explode from 2.2 gigawatts in 2020 up to a massive 7.5 gigawatts by 2050.
Wow, more than triple.
Yeah. And wind power is set to absolutely dominate that expansion,
Yeah.
reaching 4.5 gigawatts by 2050. But what's truly remarkable, I think, is that this level of wind capacity, it would only occupy about 0.6% tiny of the region's unprotected land area.
So huge room for more if needed.
It's exactly vast room for expansion. Solar PV capacity is also projected to jump significantly by 2050, and this maybe raises an important question. How fast can they actually decarbonize? The study shows CO2 emissions in the power and heat sectors can basically be eliminated as early as 2030.
2030, that's incredibly soon.
It is. With all fossil fuel thermal power plants phased out by then, it's incredibly fast.
That is astonishing speed for decarbonization. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting for me, the money side. The levelized cost of electricity, the LCOE in Lapland. This study projects it dropping by an amazing 53% from 2020 levels, reaching just 28.2 euros per megawatt hour by 2050. How? How can an Arctic region get such dramatic cost reductions? How is that feasible techno-economically?
It comes down to a really brilliant synergy and leveraging the region's unique geography. It's the powerful complementarity between wind power, which is typically stronger in winter, as you'd expect, and solar PV, which really picks up in spring and summer. That's the key. The data in the study shows wind turbine performance can be like 5% stronger in winter and maybe 10% weaker in summer, perfectly enhancing this natural balance.
Okay, so they balance each other out seasonally.
Precisely. And then you add the famous nightless night phenomenon in summer. Solar radiation can start as early as 1:00 a.m. and keep going right until midnight.
Right, maximizing the solar output during the warmer months.
Exactly. So this combined, much more balanced generation profile throughout the year. It maximizes the use of the grid, the infrastructure efficiency, and that leads directly to those impressive cost reductions. It's almost like the Arctic weather, which you might think is a challenge.
Becomes its biggest asset for energy.
It kind of does, yeah.
Okay, so we've established Lapland can generate incredibly cheap green electricity. Fantastic. But the vision, as we said, goes way beyond just electricity. It's about fueling the future. So how does the region then pivot to become this powerhouse for e-fuels, those vital fuels for the tough sectors?
Well, the research projects a really significant shift in the fuel supply, kicking off from the 2030s. And that's mainly driven by the transport sector switching over to e-fuels. Things like EFTL, that's Fischer-Tropsch liquids, basically synthetic fuels that mimic petroleum products.
Like synthetic diesel or jet fuel.
Exactly, alongside specific e-diesel and e-kerosene, all made using renewable electricity. Electrolytic hydrogen production is set to dominate. The capacity reaches about 0.95 gigawatt hours of hydrogen measured by its lower heating value, LHV, which needs around 1.43 gigawatts of electrical input by 2050. And here's a really clever piece of the puzzle. Lapland's existing pulp and paper industry.
Okay, how do they fit in?
They play a crucial role because they provide readily available biogenic CO2.
Biogenic, so CO2 from biological sources, like
Right.
wood processing.
Exactly. CO2 sourced from living organisms or their recent activities. And that CO2 is essential for producing these e-hydrocarbons like the EFTL fuels. So it effectively creates a sustainable carbon cycle. You're using carbon that was recently absorbed from the atmosphere.
That is clever, using existing industry byproducts. Okay, so what about the cost? Are these Arctic e-fuels competitive?
The analysis really breaks it down. The levelized cost of e-hydrogen, LCOH2, it could be as low as 61.9 euros per megawatt hour of hydrogen, which is roughly 2.1 euros per kilogram by 2050.
And electricity is the main cost driver there.
Overwhelmingly, electricity cost makes up about 87% of that hydrogen cost. What's also interesting is that e-methanol emerges as the lowest cost hydrogen-derived e-fuel, around 96.1 euros per megawatt hour, and that's largely thanks to that local access to low-cost biogenic CO2 we just talked about.
Right, the synergy with the paper mills.
E-ammonia is projected a bit higher, 101.1 euros per megawatt hour, and EFTL fuels at 125.9. These are incredibly competitive numbers on a global scale.
They really sound like it. Especially when, as the study does, you compare Lapland's potential costs to other global suppliers. You mentioned Shetland, the Atacama Desert in Chile, even Greenland.
Exactly. And while some of those regions might, offer marginal cost advantages on specific fuels, this analysis really emphasizes Lapland's significant non-cost benefits.
Like being in the EU.
That's a huge one. Easier trade, better energy security for the EU market. Plus, compared to Greenland, Lapland has that milder climate existing infrastructure, so it's more practical. And unlike Shetland or Greenland, the study suggests it wouldn't need that massive population influx to run the e-fuel industry. And one more point. Lapland's ability to hit a stable, low LCOE for electricity by 2035. That allows it to build out its fuel conversion industry relatively early, gain know-how, which could potentially keep investment risks and the cost of capital lower, and that heavily influences the final e-fuel price.
Right. So it's not just the raw production cost, it's the whole ecosystem, stability, risk, infrastructure,
It's the
politics.
whole picture, exactly.
It's clear this vision for Lapland is about smart integrated systems, not just brute force production. So, beyond the direct output of power and fuels, what about using the byproducts
Right.
and the wider economic ripples for the region itself?
Yeah, this is another fascinating part of the research.
Yeah.
It identifies a really significant opportunity with waste heat. The fuel conversion units, the electrolyzers and synthesis plants, they generate a massive amount of waste heat. Over 5,000 gigawatt hours thermal by 2050 is the projection.
That's a lot of heat.
It is. Now, about 1,226 gigawatt hours thermal is recovered for district heating, which is great, but the remaining waste heat, that presents huge opportunities for more value creation. What's really interesting here is how the study identifies greenhouses as a prime beneficiary.
Greenhouses in the Arctic.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
They could use this low-cost heat, maybe supplemented with efficient LEDs for light, to significantly boost domestic agricultural production.
Wow. So enhancing food security locally, maybe even for Finland or the EU.
That's the idea, turning a waste stream into a strategic resource. Imagine fresh, Arctic-grown produce year-round.
That's genuinely innovative. And the analysis also mentioned something about system flexibility, saying Lapland's system needs surprisingly little battery storage. Why is that?
It's largely down to the inherent flexibility of the Power-to-X unit themselves.
Okay.
The water electrolyzers, for example, they can adjust their hydrogen production quite flexibly based on when renewable electricity is available. They can ramp up and down. And similarly, the study suggests steel plants, which would use the hydrogen, can also adjust their operations somewhat to follow the electrolyzer output.
Ah, so the consumers of the energy provide some of the flexibility.
Exactly. Makes the whole system much more resilient without relying solely on batteries. Now, there is still a role for hydrogen storage. The study models about 14.6 gigawatt hours of capacity, mostly for ensuring baseload operation for certain processes. But the system relies less on traditional battery storage and more on this dynamic response of its industrial components. It's a very robust, efficient design.
Beyond the clever technical stuff, this sounds like a massive potential win for the region itself. What does the research say about the broader economic and societal benefits?
Oh, they're projected to be substantial. Lapland's overall annual energy system cost is actually forecast to decrease by 28% as they phase out expensive fossil fuels.
A decrease in cost, while building all this new stuff?
Yes, because the running costs of renewables are so low once built. The cumulative capital investment is about 6.8 billion euros from 2020 to 2050. That investment enables full regional self-sufficiency and allows energy exports to other parts of Finland. And the analysis suggests these upfront investments can be recovered in roughly 13 years the amortization period, which implies long-term cost stability and real resilience against future fossil fuel price shocks.
And what about local communities?
They stand to gain significantly. Local municipalities could see major fiscal revenue boosts. Real estate taxes just from the wind power plants are projected to grow from about 4.9 million euros currently to an estimated 29 million euros by 2050.
That's serious money for local services.
Absolutely. It directly supports UN Sustainable Development Goal 8, decent work and economic growth. And indirectly, it helps support SDGs 3 and 4, things like healthcare and education, through increased public funds. It's a really holistic potential transformation.
It truly sounds like a comprehensive vision. Okay, let's pull back a bit. What does this all mean for you, our listener, and for the bigger global energy picture? What are the far-reaching implications if Lapland or places like it really take off, like this study suggests?
Well, fundamentally, this analysis reaffirms that a transition like Lapland's allows Finland as a whole to phase out net electricity imports and achieve complete CO2 emission elimination. Power and heat sectors hitting zero by 2030, which is remarkable, and then transport and industry, including that really tough-to-abate steel industries switching to hydrogen direct reduction hitting zero by 2050. That's a direct, powerful contribution to UN SDG 13, climate action. Now, the study is careful to acknowledge limitations. It didn't fully model, say, interconnections to Sweden and Norway beyond 2020 levels, and it didn't simulate the actual quantities of e-fuels that might be exported.
Okay.
And importantly, it does note the societal sustainability constraints, particularly regarding potential impacts on Sami indigenous lands, though it also highlights that the study specifically excluded protected wilderness areas when estimating the wind power potential.
So mindful of those critical issues.
Yes, but what it ultimately illustrates, I think, is that these remote, sparsely populated regions like Lapland, they aren't limitations. They're actually potential catalysts for really innovative, sustainable energy solutions that can significantly boost global defossilization efforts.
What an incredible journey we've taken through, from winter wind to summer sun, unlocking the Arctic region's sustainable energy potential. We've seen how Lapland could potentially move to a 100% renewable system, become this crucial e-fuel exporter, using waste heat smartly for local agriculture, and driving real economic growth. It's quite a picture.
And maybe here's a final thought to leave you with, something to mull over. This study indicates Lapland only needs to tap into about 16% of its estimated onshore wind potential, and maybe 29% of its biogenic CO2 sources for its own needs and planned Finnish exports. So think about that. How might such vast untapped resources in Arctic regions, and maybe similar regions elsewhere, how might they reshape global energy trade routes? Could they attract entirely new energy-intensive industries looking for clean power and feedstocks, far beyond even what this specific study explored as the world desperately searches for sustainable solutions?
That is definitely a lot to consider, a huge potential future unfolding. Thank you for joining us on the Step Dive.